All right. Thanks everyone for your patience. Cool. So we're going to get started. Welcome to Bleeding Edge Web. Let me turn off my laptop. Oh, there we go. Wrong. There we go. On last month's slide. Okay, September. All right, welcome to Bleeding Edge Web. We're happy to have you. As you see on here, I'm sure you signed up because you're interested in the AI talks. So I'm very excited about those as well. Ted and Ryan have both spoken at the meetup before, and we've always really enjoyed their talk. So I think this is going to be great. And if you're new to the meetup, we typically do our news from the Bleeding Edge segment every month, which is our little update on kind of what's going on with web technology, things that you'll probably find interesting for a web developer. So a little bit of housekeeping. We do have a Slack group. Feel like joining in the conversation there, feel free to sign up. And we are always interested in speakers and sponsors. Someone actually earlier asked me about that. So if you go to edgeatx.org, we've got this handy little page that gives you more information about what we're looking for. It's got an email link. We will receive that. So we always do appreciate that. On sponsorship, it's pretty cheap. If your company ever does anything like that, it's pretty cheap to get your name in front of the group, get your name in front of our email list. We tweet out, what we're doing. So if you're ever interested in anything like that, just let me know as well. And thanks to our host, Expedia. I just had updated this. This is what I get for editing in real time. I was trying to add a little hiring link here.
It's all good. Don't worry about it. So I just wanted to say thanks everyone for coming, and you can go to expediajobs.com if you're interested in seeing the opportunities that we have. I think we have 100+ tech jobs open there right now. So check it out.
Yep. So here is the updated slide that you will see later here on the website, expediajobs.com. And yeah, thanks very much. It's very kind of them to host us every month. We really appreciate it. This is a great facility. So thanks, Jonas, and the rest of the team here. Cool. So let's jump into our update. So libraries and frameworks, there's actually lots of interesting stuff going on since we chatted last month. So Dino, I always like to pronounce it Deno, but it's Dino as in Dino the dinosaur as the correct pronunciation. If you're not familiar with it, it's by the same guy who originally came up with Node. And creatively, he just rearranged the letters and it became Dino as his next framework iteration. It's secure by default, built-in TypeScript. It basically is sold as a batteries included version of Node. So if you're not already on Node, if you're interested in looking at a tool like that, this is a good one. It's also actually compatible with Node, the ecosystem. So all the libraries and things in that ecosystem will work. So the reason it's being spotlighted is that they just had a release 1.46. It's their last release in the 1 series, and it's got built-in code signing and a bunch of other interesting stuff if you're in that world. Plus, importantly, their standard library is finally now stable. So that's all the really core libraries that you want to be able to assume are there and you can count on. They are now stable. And then the reason that's important is that their 2.0 version is the next version coming out, major release, and they put out an RC version a couple of weeks ago. So they've standardized a few more things, made lots of improvements. If you are currently using Dino 1.x, just note that there are some breaking changes there to be aware of, and lots more. So basically, it's a great time to check it out if you've heard about it, but haven't really taken the plunge. If you're in the Node world and are interested in something that's maybe a little more modern in certain ways, definitely a good time to go check that one out. Also, a fair number of notable releases in other libraries and frameworks. So Material UI is a very popular React framework for doing theming based on Google's Material UI patterns. They just had a major release. RSPack, or what I thought was RSPack until I looked up the pronunciation, but it's RSPack, This is an interesting tool because basically if you use Webpack, there's a good chance that you've probably been using it for many years and haven't looked at alternatives just because it's what you use. Well, there's actually, in the last year or two, been a lot of innovation in that space. And this is one of the tools that's become really popular. It's basically a drop-in replacement for Webpack to do bundling of JavaScript code. It's written in Rust, so it's highly performant. It's written by ByteDance, their technical team. So if you don't know them, they're the people who make TikTok primarily and other tools. So again, if you currently use Webpack and might be interested in a basically really simple way to really increase the performance, you might try that one out. And then JS diff is a really interesting library if you have the need to roll your own version of diffing, like, for example, what we see in Git when we merge code. If you ever wanted to build something like that in your own application, this is a really great library that actually does that. And they just had a major release as well. Redwood is a full stack JavaScript framework, so it's very much like Next.js and many other frameworks that are out there. They just had a major release with actually lots of really cool features. So I'm not going to go into the details of it, but again, it's one of those things where if you're not married to a framework or if you're looking to maybe explore other frameworks, this might be a good time to check out Redwood. Again, full stack JavaScript. One of its key selling points is that it's also batteries included. So it basically includes everything you would need to get up and running with an application quickly. Express.js. So if you're in the Node world, you're probably very familiar with Express. It's a Node application library. They just had a major release. And Biome is an interesting one. So Biome is the tool chain of the web is what they call themselves. This one kind of flew under the radar for me, but it's been around for about a year. And this is basically a combination of multiple things. So probably a lot of us are familiar with Prettier, which does formatting of various languages. We're probably also familiar with things like ESLint, which does linting. This tool actually does all of that stuff together, and it does it, again, very performantly. So again, you'll see this word a lot, if you can read it, Rust. So that's kind of the big thing that's been happening over the last couple of years is people creating these new tools in Rust, which is incredibly performant. And so this is a really great one. Again, if you currently use Prettier or ESLint or some of these other things, this tool claims at least to be a dramatic speed improvement. I haven't tried it personally, but it looks pretty interesting. And it has multiple tools in one, which is always nice. Date functions. So this is a pretty common date library. It's kind of the successor to Moment.js if you used that before. So the 4.0 release adds full time zone support, which is a nice improvement there. And then Bun. So you'll notice that generally I stick to major releases, but Bun.1.1.28 is an extremely specific patch release. But I'm highlighting it because in this patch release, they added support for compiling and running C code from JavaScript, which is incredibly interesting if you have that use case. But there's a lot of cases where there are libraries in C that's the only way that you can use them. So like cryptography libraries, some security libraries, things like that. So this gives us a really easy way compared to, the only other ways you can do it right now are very kind of roundabout and very complicated. So this is extremely interesting and unusual that it's in such a specific patch release. Baseline news. So baseline is, we like to highlight that because when browsers come out with new releases that have new features, we consider things to be baseline when they are available across all the now modern evergreen browsers that we care about. So typically Chrome and Firefox are on pretty much a monthly cadence at this point. Safari is generally not, but we just had a major Safari release as well, which is cool. So we had lots of good stuff come out. And again, we're focusing on really the things that are new to baseline. So one thing that's now newly available to all the browsers since Firefox 1.30 is mutually exclusive details elements. So this is one where the detail tag itself is not new. It's been around for a long time. And it basically creates this little disclosure type thing in the UI. And if you create multiple of them, then it basically does that. So the part that's new is if you give these things a new name, attribute, that is the same name, then all you have to do is that, and it basically functions as a mutually exclusive accordion style UI. Simple as that, no JavaScript, standard HTML. So that's pretty cool, and that's now usable in all browsers. Backdrop filter is another extremely useful one. It's exactly what you see in this image. You can apply a backdrop filter to any element in the DOM, and it will provide an effect that allows what's behind it to show through and applies that effect to it. So as you can see in this example, it's applying a blur. There's lots of different effects: brightness, inversion, saturation, you name it. So again, you can now use that in all browsers, which is really nice. This one is kind of a very specific thing that you probably won't find very useful unless you're doing pretty specific canvas work. So I'm not going to go into the details of it, but this is a performance optimization thing for canvas, basically. And this one could be useful depending on your use case. So content visibility basically takes an element in the DOM, and it tells the browser that for that element and its subtree of nodes, don't do any layout, rendering, or any painting. It's very similar conceptually to like display none, but the difference is that it with display none, you're still actually rendering everything, and the browser is still doing work, and then it's just hiding it after the fact. In this case, it's like a preemptive hint to tell the browser, don't even render this at all to the user. And so there's various use cases where that can be extremely helpful, especially on page startup. And then one thing that I found that's really useful is this website called the Web Features Explorer. And this basically covers all the stuff I just talked about and a lot more, and goes back in time to, all the releases that have happened back since 2015, basically. So all the web features that are available in browsers, you can kind of see what their availability is. So if I click on September, for example, this is a big long list of stuff. If you get to the bottom, these are the 4 that I just highlighted and talked about a little bit, because these are newly available. So again, newly available means that as of last month, these things are now available across all the browsers. All these green ones are widely available. So that means they've actually been available in all the evergreen browsers for the past 30 months. So you can basically count on them being there, pretty much everywhere. Newly available might be ones that you still have to check. If you have like really specific browser support, you might still have to check for those, but generally they're available. So these are the ones that I like to highlight. The funny thing is I didn't actually find this website until I had already dug around and figured these out for myself. But now that I know about this site, it's going to speed up my slide creation next time I want to highlight some of these. But if you're interested in the features of the web that are, on the cutting edge and available to use, that's a great place to check out. So the interesting thing is that that website is open source. The data behind it is open source and community managed, but it's also the exact same data that powers Baseline, which has kind of become the industry standard that Google and other people also look at. So pretty handy. We've got some industry news this month that's interesting as well. Laravel raised $57 million. So if you haven't heard of Laravel, probably means you're not a PHP developer, but Laravel is, quote, the PHP framework for web artisans. That's what they claim. The money is for hiring, basically, and also they're doing a big focus on open source in the PHP world. And so they want to do a lot of paid maintenance. But then more importantly, for that money, they're building out Laravel Cloud. So they're basically competing with Next.js, in the JavaScript world, doing something similar in the PHP world, essentially. So they want to build out an entire kind of point and click cloud environment where you can fire up and host applications as easily as you can in these other platforms. There's an opinion piece I found called PHP is the new JavaScript. I don't know if I agree with that, but the point of the article is basically that PHP has become a lot more popular, largely on the back of Laravel, is his contention at least. I've looked at Laravel as a framework. It actually looks really nice. It's kind of inspired by Rails and other similar types of frameworks. But honestly, I don't think I can ever get past PHP itself, like having to type -arrow every time I want to just call a method, just can't do that. But if you're in that world, interesting news. And then this I thought was scary. but also interesting from a technical perspective. So a bunch of researchers got together, I think it was over the summer, earlier in the summer, and basically found a hack in Kia's web portal, the car Kia, and basically found that they could access millions of vehicles pretty much arbitrarily. They could track their location, open the locks, start the ignition, lots of other stuff. Basically, the question, I think jokingly, was, were they Israelis? No, interestingly enough, they were actually they started out as a group of college kids several years ago who were playing around and discovered that they accidentally triggered the horns of every single scooter on campus to go off at the same time, like every single electric scooter. And that was their first realization that poking around on, security things was kind of fun. And so they became more of a formal white hat hacking group. And so that's kind of what they're doing now. And they specialize in auto industry security, essentially. So it's kind of interesting, actually, the backstory. This particular hack, we read about hacks a lot of times. Like if you were here a month or two ago, we talked about the CrowdStrike thing. That was an extremely difficult, technically challenging hack that was executed over multiple years, right? Very, very technical hack. This one was they went to the web portal, viewed source, and found one of the API endpoints just did not use authorization. Like, scarily simple thing to break into. And so what they did was basically all you had to do is create a user account, and the web API was not checking to differentiate your user, whether it was just a user or whether it was a dealer admin. And so you could basically go in as a dealer admin and just take over any account, which was, pretty bad. So you might be thinking, well, I don't own a Kia, so that's great. Well, they actually found similar hacks across all these cars as well. And so I was reading this list thinking, I was happy that I was in the clear, but then I saw Ferrari and I was like, darn it. Just kidding. I don't actually have a Ferrari. But anyway, this was like very interesting. Hopefully your car wasn't on that list. So events, there's actually a few really good events as well for web developers coming up that are all free actually and virtual. So VTConf I actually mentioned last month. If you were here, I'm highlighting it again because it's actually next month. And this one is a 24-hour marathon of talks. So definitely take a nap beforehand, get your coffee, but it'll be recorded so you can watch it over time. But this one is highly recommended. The speaker list is really excellent. So the topics are going to be really good. Definitely check that one out. And again, it's free. DevSecCon is a bit more specific, but if you drive a Kia, maybe you're interested in this one. But basically it's AI plus application security. It's hosted by a web application security company. And again, it's free. So check that one out if you're interested in those topics. And then JetBrains, makers of various IDEs that are very popular. Apparently for the last few years, they've been hosting a yearly JavaScript Day conference, single day conference. It's focused primarily on JavaScript and TypeScript development. And it's also only one day. It's not 24 hours. It's like 9 to 5. So, people with less free time can probably get this one knocked out. It does have some good speakers as well. Evan Yu, the creator of Vue, is going to be talking at this one as well, among other people. So check it out. Pardon? That one, I don't think is in Austin. I don't think this one is actually in person at all. I think it's only virtual. Yeah. And then Next.js Conf, this one actually does have an in-person option, but it also has an online virtual option as well that's free. This one will be mostly for Next.js/React developers, but if you are in that world, this will probably be interesting to you, so recommended. And then just a few handy tools to wrap up with. So as developers, we typically all enjoy our monospaced fonts. This is a new free one that came out called Server Mono. It's very highly inspired by typewriter type fonts, as you can see there, that sample. Very focused on readability. So good one to try out if you're into mono fonts. And while we're on the topic, there was another one as well that came out over the last month, Departure. So this one was inspired by kind of 80s, 90s software and sci-fi. And the website is pretty cool. So I would recommend you check out the website and just kind of scroll through it. It's very pretty. It's got little neat effects. It's very interactive. They're pretty neat. And there's a little Easter egg at the bottom as well. And then this is a good one. This is actually not a developer thing. This is just something that I was very happy to see. So if you have an iPhone and you haven't seen this, they have a new distraction control. I'm going to refresh this just so you can see the animation. But basically, if you go to like a news site or a recipe site or any of the ones that notoriously just put all the crap in front of what you're trying to read, now you can just click a button and like this little animation explodes the little ad out of the way and just clears your screen. So it's kind of a nice little Zen thing. Again, specific to iPhone, but if you have the new version of Safari, you'll have access to that feature, which is really nice. And then finally, just for fun, so this is a code pin and an article that went with it on creating an unbeatable tic-tac-toe game like this. So I'm playing against the computer. Pretty cool. But the interesting thing about it is that there is no JavaScript. This is entirely created through HTML and CSS. And so the crazy thing is, if I view source on this, on the game board, so you can see, let me make this smaller. So this is what the markup looks like. You can read that. That's the markup for the game board. And so the gist of it is that there's a little bit of HAML, which is server-side Ruby code. And so programmatically, that HAML basically encapsulates the algorithm for tic-tac-toe. So for any given move, for all combinations of tic-tac-toe, there's always one, at least one or more ideal next moves, right? That kind of thing. But all it does is it spits out HTML. And so what it does is it creates a div with an ID of every possible combination of X's and O's that you can have in tic-tac-toe. And then it uses CSS to target when you click on one, it basically reveals the state of the div that has that combination. Like it calculates, okay, if I click on X, the next move I should make as far as the algorithm is concerned is like an O. So the link on that is generated with a link to that state. So it basically plays itself just through revealing different divs through this after CSS rule. So pretty interesting. I didn't do it justice. So if you're interested in actually how it's implemented, go to the article and check it out. But again, done entirely through CSS. So kind of a creative approach there. That's it for this month. So I appreciate it. And we have Ted up next.
Hi, my name is Ted Patrick. I am the CTO of an AI company. We're doing AI for organizational intelligence. I use AI in my work every single day, and we have kind of embraced it from our development side as well. And I'm going to take you through some of the development workflows and try to explain both how these models work and what makes them optimized to generate better results. Obviously, you've probably all put generated code with either ChatGPT or others, but there are better ways to do it. And there's better ways to give hints about what you're trying to accomplish, and so that you can actually get the most out of the LLM output. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how that engine actually works, what it's doing, and then kind of dive into certain use cases. At a certain point, I have not prepared any code for this talk, so we're going to dive into a deep end that may go anywhere. I don't have pre-written code, so we're going to generate that code and then we're going to iterate through it. And I'm going to show you some of the use cases that we've been pretty successful. So the first thing that you'll see here is this is basically an LLM request architecture. You are going to combine some context and a prompt. You're going to send that to a language model, don't care which one, and then that language model is going to return output back to you, ideally in this case code. Now, there's tons of different models. There's ChatGPT, there's, I'll be using, OpenAI's standard model, and then essentially you can go any which way, but what we have discovered is the context is the most important part of anything that you can do. The more context that you can provide in terms of input will directly result in better output. And that can be the questions you ask, how you phrase things, how you fence code, the inputs in terms of images or the other data. So it really matters. That context of what you're pouring into this engine will determine what comes out. And so, like, this is my number one rule, which is context is absolutely king. If you don't provide good context, you are going to get terrible output. And if the better context you provide, the better output you'll get, including when you get into refinement steps of I want to add this or change this variable or modify this in another way. I can get into that a bit. So one question is which model? There's a lot of them out there. I'm not very picky about it. We've used Anthropic Haiku quite a bit. I've used ChatGPT quite a bit. I've used, I can't remember. It's the code editor one that Microsoft bought. It'll come to me when I pull up my editor. But anyway, I use all of them in combinations, and I use all of them in different use cases because the UI supports different use cases. But you also want to get specific in your prompts and in your requests about what programming language. The programming languages are not equal inside of LLMs because certain ones have been trained heavily on certain languages. There is a lot of Python in existence. I code in Python and all my examples will be in Python. And actually what you'll find is language models, since Python has been around a long time, they can utilize that language and build on it because there's so many code examples of what to do and how to use it. And so you'll get into kind of a statistical, how popular is a language or how much code has the training been exposed to, and that will only improve your results as to which model. You'll find some models that are coded that are basically trained just on Rust or just on Python or just on whatever language du jour. Take your pick. You know what language you like to use, and that's not my business to say, but I have found there is a strong ability to generate almost perfect, runnable, right now, instant out of Python. And that's my specific kind of bent. Also, you'll want to state which dependencies. If you have library dependencies, if you have code block dependencies, if you wanted something emitted as a class, if you want something emitted as a function, if you want something to be recursive, be as absolutely specific as you can be, and list your dependencies. So if you're going to use just standard library, make sure to say that in your prompts and in your requests. Only use the standard library. Only use this version. And as specific as you get, the LLM will guide the output to target that. So it's really up to you. Better the input, better the context, better the output. But the output is non-deterministic. It's a big word, but it means that I could ask it the same question. It's going to give me a different answer every single time. So don't be afraid to go a couple times. It's totally okay to delete what it wrote and regenerate, or add some additional context and regenerate. That's kind of a workflow that you get used to. But sometimes the determinism in code is actually, the variance is very low. It doesn't vary a whole lot. It'll change variable names. It'll change how it might do a loop. It'll change some behavior, but it's usually its output is dependent on what has been trained on and how many examples it's seen of, say, a for loop versus a while loop versus some other form of iteration. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover. We're going to generate some code. We're going to generate a test. We're going to generate some documentation. We're going to generate some HTML. And then we're actually going to break the code we wrote, and then we're going to debug it with an LLM, all from scratch. Okay? We good? Okay, this is where it gets terrifying. So we're off the reservation now, and I'm in, ChatGPT 4.0, and I can simply say, generate FizzBuzz in Python. Zoom toolbar out of the way. Okay, so we have a FizzBuzz. Okay, and so I can simply copy the code. Sorry, blast it in the distance here. Okay, so I copy the code. I'm gonna come down here to my editor. I'm gonna go to FizzBuzz, paste, and I'm gonna hit save. And then I need a new terminal. Yes. Oh yeah. No. Thank you. Let me hide that. Is that better? Sorry about that. Okay, so there's code completion. Okay, FizzBuzz. If you're not familiar with it, you're basically iterating over an n number, and based on characters and frequencies of characters, you're going to either say fizz, buzz, fizz, or buzz, and it's just going to print it into the output along with the number that is there. Pretty standard thing, but this doesn't give me a whole lot of information. So we've generated some code, and the thing is that I don't like the output because I'd rather have these if cases be external function. So in my output, I can actually ask for that. Okay, output this as a set of internal functions with an outer is buzz. All right, let me blow this up. So again, it's now saying it's going to generate essentially FizzBuzz, but now I'm actually able to break the problem down into truthiness. So it's now outputting small values that I can then use later on. And so I can simply copy the code again, and we can take it over and hit all and paste, and we can hit save. And down here we hit run, and we get same output. So code generation. But if you wanted to modify this, we're going to get into some cases where I don't like this because what it's done is it's broken all of the evaluation statement into is FizzBuzz and then is fizz, and then it's basically cascading in this if. And it makes sense, but say I wanted to actually write documentation for this, or in fact, like debug. So if I simply break the app, and we can get into this, and go back to the terminal, new terminal, and then I run FizzBuzz. So it's giving me syntax error. So I actually come back in, and the way I fence code is with backticks. In Python, backtick isn't really a character. In JavaScript, it is in terms of string evaluation and some string evaluations in modern JavaScript. And so if you want to fence code, depending on the language, you need to choose your characters carefully. And by fence code, what I mean is here is an error message. And I basically just do 2 backticks, and then you paste directly into the backticks in between the two. And in doing that, it'll basically give that context as kind of a little island of code that allows it to self-fix. And it understands what it had output correctly before. And so you can get into situations where it looks like there's a typo in your code. The function call is fizzbuzz is mistyped. So it understood the error message I put in. I have taken server error messages out of Django. I have taken server messages out of Nginx. I have taken Nginx configurations and pumped them through ChatGPT. You'd be shocked to see how you can iterate on things. For instance, we had a particular problem with an Nginx config. We needed to add a route to the config and rewrite the URL data. The prompt was simply, hey, using this config, backticks, paste, and then you'd ask your question. So providing all that context, you can then control the output and guide it in kind of different directions, basically pushing it towards doing one thing or the other. So one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about was docs. So I've sort of stopped writing docs. I mean, I've written quite a bit of code on this project, but one of the things that's handy is we have other developers and I want to make sure everything has doc strings. So asking this system for doc strings, provide doc strings for all functions within backticks, paste, go. And so I can hand it blocks of code and it can self-document. So it understands the logical structure of what's here. It's basically saying, hey, here's the main function that runs fizzbuzz. Here's the parameters. You're passing an n of integer. The upper limit for the fizzbuzz sequence is fizz. This determines which number. Again, we started from scratch, but now we have code that is abusively documented. I mean, every single function call is telling it exactly what it does, which is wonderful. But I've done this from zero. And I think that there's something meaningful here. So I can copy the code again. We can go back, paste, save, iterate, fizzbuzz. So, and I think, what was the other one we were going to cover? So we've covered code generation. We haven't covered test generation. We've covered documentation, and we've covered debugging with basically the output statement. So we're going to do test generation and then HTML. Let's do test generation. So write a PyTest to test fizzbuzz. So I specified my dependency was PyTest. PyTest is pretty much one of the most popular ones in Python. And essentially, it gives me test underscore fizzbuzz, and it's basically going to start in, hey, capture the output from std out. It's going to run each of the division functions, and then it's going to be basically combined tests. So it's going to test each individual function. So each one of these functions is a test. Test fizz, test buzz, test fizzbuzz, test number. I have no idea why that would fail, but test combined, and then it basically bundles all the tests together. Again, I'm just standing here and writing code via browser in a way that's absolutely bizarre. And honestly, I for a while was like a little bit nervous about showing this. It's like, but it really does. If you give it, the more information you give it, the more context you give it, the better the output will get. And so bring your dependencies, bring your code, and begin to iterate on it. Actually, one of the ones that we have been using, and this one gets really weird. This is a prototyping tool called Conti. And all I did was I opened up Conti, sitting down right there, and I dragged the username, password, and login button and the UI. And all I'm going to do is take a picture of this. Okay, so I've got a flat 2D image, and what I can do is It can go to a different GPT. This one has been trained on images and trained on HTML and Tailwind. So it will generate HTML Tailwind output from raw images. If you want to go directly from Figma or other pixel perfect UI, it works just as well. But this is just rough. And let's see what we got. So I've got this image on my desktop. I'm just going to drag it here. Generate HTML using Tailwind of this login dialog. Use the dialog component HTML tag and use flex for play. Here's an HTML prototype. Just, it really, I like the fact that it just imported from Google APIs, just got the fonts in there. And it kind of found that the font looked like Comic New. See how weird this is getting? And then basically it has some CSS for the body and the CSS for the dialogue, including kind of small border raises. Well, hell, let's see what we got. So I can go back here and go back and go UI, which is an empty file, just hit paste, save. And then simply open a browser, dev workflow. Since it has a URL, it's gonna fire up local server. Go to UI.html. Here's FizzBuzz login password. And if you want to inspect it, fascinating in the sense that it's providing Tailwind UI, so all of the standard padding X, padding Y, width full, border black, all that syntax is in there, and it's effectively there. I think the thing that's most interesting is you can pretty much take any picture of any UI and you can extract really high quality HTML from it directly from images. Now that's a feature I never thought I would see in my lifetime, but here we are. And again, it's interesting what you can do with these tools and how you can use them to improve your workflow, to fill in gaps, to upgrade developers to just upgrading their output, but also refining that output. Like take things that you've already built and refine it and refactor it. You can make pretty dramatic changes to things in a short period of time using these generational AI techniques. And they're pretty simple. Notice I really didn't use anything other than standard ChatGPT. You can get real elaborate with this. I have folks who like to run the models locally in Olama and other things, and it's like, that's great, but just try it out. Try it in ways that you haven't thought, but keep in mind that the context that you provide is going to directly determine the output that you get. The better the input, better the output. That's it. Thank you. The question is, have I ever tried Perplexity? No, I haven't. I can't say.
The reason I like Perplexity is first off, I'm not a fan of the Darkula or the presentation on ChatGPT. That messes me up. But Perplexity gives great code examples and great context, follow-up context But what I also like about it is that it just answers the question. I was using Copilot initially for a long, long time and was very happy with it. My productivity shot through the roof and I was totally impressed, starting like 6 months ago with my first use of it. And so I've been exploring all of them. But the one thing that Copilot did that completely annoyed me is it kept saying, if you have any more questions, feel free to ask. This like artificial coddling. And I would say, would you please stop that and only answer the question? And of course, it forgets that on the next thread. But Perplexity only answers the question. There's no fluff. And the other thing I like about it, if you start to ask social questions like political questions or something like that, Copilot will immediately say, you know, it's a little too delicate, you know, can't handle that topic here. Perplexity is ruthless and will answer all the questions that you may want to ask.
I'm sure there's going to be a long line of better and better and better and better AI systems. So I'm not picky with them, and I try a bunch and I find out what works. But honestly, it boils down to the same thing. It's only as good as the context and input that you give them.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Claude, same thing. Like, so I found the same thing. Is like the better you can do the context. And I like the fact that you can, once it gives you an answer, you can interact with it.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful.
No.
So anyway.
There's a word for it, which I can't remember, but Perplexity is great if you want it to do the research. So you ask it a question and then it builds a series of prompts to solve the question, and those prompts will go out towards the internet for you, and then it compiles all the research. So it's really good for like if you like arguing about dumb shit on Facebook.
I mean, it just depends. It really depends on what you're doing. So
Huh?
it just depends on what you're doing. Like,
Yeah.
I think the context really matters. It's like,
Yeah.
But the same rules apply. It's like any type of form of code can be generated. And you can use them in many different ways. Any other questions? Cool, thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Remember the mic is tricky here. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Ryan, as you may have seen. Okay, cool. It's gonna be a great talk in my opinion, because I prepared no slides. So I'm sure that should set us off in a good way. What I'm hopeful to share here is I have a hybrid offshore development agency, and my thesis is that we do estimates right now. Like if you're going to do an MVP with us, our price range is about 50K to about 180K. I personally think that number is going to get cut in half in about a year's time. And so as a business owner, you might take it as a margin, or you might try and, you know, have the cheapest prices. I'm not sure exactly what you want to do with that, but I do know, or I feel strongly that we will get smoked if we aren't able to perform at that level. That's my theory. Could be wrong. We'll see. Maybe it's blockchain, maybe it's not. So what I've been doing is I've got a new project. One of my buddies owns a trucking brokerage, and he hates the software that's available in the space. If you're not familiar with the space, basically, it's like a marketplace sort of for shipping. So you would call a trucking brokerage and say, hey, I need to move this cargo from here to here. He has some people who drive for him. He has other people who will have their own trucks and will take the loads. And he just has to manage all the logistics. And apparently it's not a very competitive software space. And so what I've decided to do, because it's a buddy of mine and the deadlines are a little loose, and you know, I was going to take advantage of it to try and see how far I could get with AI on an actual real project, with the goal being to figure out the development processes that I want to give to my teams. Because we already specialize in high velocity development. Our most frequent challenge we have when we embed with other teams is usually having tickets ready. So our team moves pretty quickly. And I feel like I want to try and continue that trend, but I'm a little nervous. If you have tried to do like Ted and gone out and tried to write some AI type code, you probably found that super productive for a while. And then you end up with like, the end of the day, you're exhausted and your code's not built. So I'm trying to come up with development flows that will allow my developers to go fast, but also write good quality code and not get stuck. So I am 11 hours and 0.2 in on this particular effort. And I can show you what the current app looks like so far. I kind of wish I had something to show you that I've actually done myself. They just look terrible if I write them. Like I've never ever created anything that looks nice in the software area. We have a designer we work with on everything, and we have kind of a process we follow. This particular design, I created completely using AI tool. I'm using a tool called V0 for this. V0 is the stuff I'm showing tonight is slightly toolchain specific. You're going to get the best mileage, as far as I can tell, if you're building with Next.js, using Tailwind for your CSS, and then using shadcn as a component library. Versal is the one who has written V0. And if you're not familiar with Versal, they're the folks who provide the hosting. I'm assuming they were the ones who created Next.js or sponsored it, and then you buy the hosting from them. Is because I don't know if you've ever tried to self-host Next.js, but it's slightly complicated. So while I was waiting, I was deciding, like, let me go ahead and just show you all how this works. Let's say that you wanted to make, since this is hosted by Expedia, let's say you want to do a Airbnb style web platform that allows people to sell dinners at their house. Like you could book a dinner at a fancy house, right? So I said, I want to create a site like Airbnb for renting rooms in homes, hosting dinners. I want to have modern design based on award-winning designs in the travel space. Build this with Next.js, Tailwind, shadcn. Give me a homepage for folks who want to book the dinner. So what I found, the general approach, get your app bootstrapped. For that, you can just use techniques like we're just demoed, where you can use, I personally prefer Claude for code. I feel like they have the best model. You can use Claude to go in and just say, hey, how do I bootstrap a Next.js app? Get it to where it's up and running and you have a hello world starting point. And then you can come in here and get this guy to blow out your design. I'll iterate on one page is my current approach. And my theory is that you could actually have your designers, our designers will use the toolkits we use when they build our wireframes. So I'm pretty sure I could get my design team to build me a starting point using shadcn. And then you could use the same technique with their code kind of as a starting point. And so, as you can see, it's creating the full site for you there. I think the stuff comes out looking pretty good. And you can iterate here to get to where you have your menu and all the elements you need, just kind of the basic core of what the site's going to look like. So that's what I did here to create this guy here. The name I brainstormed using AI. I said, give me 2-word names. And then I told it I specifically want to use the one word that's not an analogy and another word that is an analogy. And it gave me a bunch of options. I picked truck scout. It said scout like an Indian, like a baseball scout, but I was thinking kind of more like an Indian scout. I think either one works fine. And then I had to have a tagline. So I used AI to come up with the tagline as well. I spent most of my time when I was doing the design to come up with the menu system and get that working to where, we have a nice responsive application. I've definitely never created a responsive application in my life. So that felt good, even though I didn't do anything. I showed it to my wife. She said it needed more color. So that's where the colors came from. And you're able to iterate on this stuff fairly quickly. Got all the menus over here and all this kind of stuff. And so great. Cool. I created a vaporware site. Maybe I could go get funded or something like that and, run off into the sunset with the money like some of the guys do. But really what you're probably going to want to do is build a real site. So what's next? We need data, right? I like using Docker Compose flows, and the tool that allows me to move super quickly is called Cursor. I feel that Once you go cursor, you don't go back, in my opinion, or at least, you know, the next month or so. Cursor is a fork of VS Code. What that brings to the table for you is, I've got way too many of these right now, is this chat window over here. That is going to be kind of very familiar if you're like in the Copilot world and all that. However, they have a feature that is called the Composer, and it might be in beta. I know it was for a while. They don't tell you about it. And I talked to a lot of people and they're like using Cursor. And I'm like, are you using Composer? Like, what's Composer? The Composer basically allows you to add context to things and do more complex operations. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. You tell it what you want to do and it'll go out and it'll create a bunch of files and do all that kind of stuff for you. So once I got my app bootstrapped, I got the, I came over here and I added the homepage with the stylings. You could paste that, you could paste all the HTML, CSS into Cursor and say, I want you to add this page to my site, and it took care of it for me. And so it went from V0 into kind of having a working application with all the code pretty well organized. Once I got that done, then I told Cursor, hey, I like using Docker Compose based flows for my database. Create me a database that I can use locally and give me some seed data for my carriers, right? So it actually did it all, right? So it created the Docker Compose file. It put the init.sql in the right place. I don't know if you guys have ever done this flow before, but it usually requires quite a bit of Googling and time to kind of figure all that stuff out. And then it created the seed data, which is one of the things I love about working with AI is you get your dummy data for free. And so then you can kind of, if you look down here, I have that guy's running in one of these windows here. And so you come over here, this is actually coming from an API. Go ahead, all over. So we had it called couriers and it's pulling back the data there. You can see it's the same name, Fast Truck Inc. and all that kind of stuff. So I was able to get to where once I had my database set up, then you can come into Cursor and the way it works is you can say, I want to update the, you use these @ commands. Whoa, nope, not that. I want to update at carriers there. So that added the file here. I actually say I want to create a page that does CRUD over the carriers API. I probably did something like that. It creates a page, you keep it consistent with the style of the site. So that's how I got my CRUD up and running, was just kind of iterating with Cursor and just asking it to add more and more to the site. You can come in here and say, I want to search, all that kind of stuff. My client said it was very important to him to be able to export to Excel. Hey, Cursor, make it to where I can export to Excel. Boom, done, right? So now we have the ability to export out to Excel. So that got me to what I felt like was a pretty good spot. Now, like I said, if I just gave this to my dev team and told them to go, they're going to get super excited with this stuff. And it's just the code's going to go really fast until it doesn't, in my opinion. So what my thesis is that I spent 12 hours on this. If we estimated out what I just showed you with my team, calendar, you're probably talking 2 weeks of time, assuming everyone's available. We would have probably 20 hours of design time, 20 to 30 hours of design time. Dev time, we would probably have maybe 3 days or to a week. Let's say a week of dev time and 2 days of design time. So I'm at a day and a half, right? My theory is that you get about a 10x multiplier on it if you get pretty good at this stuff and you get moving. but you're just being greedy, right? So why not go a little slower and let's go for a 5x, but make it to where we can actually use the code. So that's kind of my theory. So how do I propose doing that, right? I propose doing the things that we don't normally do because they take, right? And maybe you work at a company where you do that stuff. So to me, that's going back to the basics of Agile, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to test everything. So what I did is after I got it going, I came in here and I asked Composer to go ahead and write me a test for the feature we were just looking at. So I can how to get it to rerun from there. And so I told it to use Cypress. You could kind of pick whatever you want, right? Use Playbook or whatever. So it said, write me some Cypress tests to cover this particular page. And that guy is going to run where here? Yeah. So you run the Cypress open. And so now, if you're not familiar with Cypress, you can do what they call E2E testing, which basically means you're just testing an entire feature from user interaction to network call and back to user interaction. It's my favorite style of testing. It allows you to test basically what it does and not care about how it does it, which I think is more valuable. And basically, when I told Cursor to write the test, I told it what type of test I wanted. Apart from the tools, I said, I want these tests to be where I can change the code, refactor the code, and not have to rewrite my test. Just give me very specific instructions. Don't make these tests. They're going to be a pain because the whole point of this is I want to be able to go in and refactor this code that was created for me once I know that it's doing what it does. So I was able to come in and create the test. Here's the carriers feature here. I didn't get them all done, but I got to where we've got display the title, all the different searches, allows adding a carrier. This one's pretty cool. It opens the dialogue and all that and fills it in. So that was pretty cool, right? You know, and that's about where I got to with my 11.2 hours. I spent a good bit of time trying to get Cursor to just trying to get Cursor to work with Next.js's timing was where I spent a good bit of time. I probably spent a couple hours on that. And so what I'll do now is I'll just demo adding a feature that I had already added. Let me just make sure I'm on the right branch. I am. All right. So, like I said, I want to make this towards a development workflow. It's not just like, oh wow, check it out. I created one little piece of code. So the next thing I think we would need is to have API testing. I like doing API testing. I like using an approach that uses Docker Compose. In Docker Compose, what you do is you spin up the database, you put the API in another container, and then you have a third container which contains jest and then actually fires over the wire at your API. It allows you to use JSON as a natural format. And I just feel like it's a very productive testing flow. So then what I can do, this is the prompt I used earlier. Come in and say, now we come in here. This button right here is the reset button. It'll give you kind of a new context. It's pretty good to do that as often as you can. So whenever you finish a thought with it and you get something done, go ahead and reset it. It'll clear out this side piece and it just it resets to where it's not thinking about as many things. Best way to describe it. So I'll go ahead and tell it to, I've got a Docker Compose YAML. This is referring to a file that's currently in my code base for running Postgres. So by the way, we're already doing something similar to what I want to do. I want to create some API integration tests. Start by creating tests to test /carriers endpoint from this location here, which is the API route. If you use Next.js, there's a folder you can just stick these different files in, and it'll create basically a server function for you. I'd like to create a new Docker Compose file that contains services, including a Postgres DB, similar to what is being used in this other YAML file, the Next.js app, and the test services in a Node app. Is basically just describing the various services I want to be in the file. I'm using the Claude 3.5 model. I'll go ahead and submit that. Now, it's starting to work on its response. And as you can see, it's creating the various files that are required for this particular feature. So it's created, I just have an X on that. So it created a new Docker file, created a Docker test file, package JSON got updated. I like that with this, you get the diffs. That guy there, and then here's my test. So let's see how close it gets. It's odd to me that it didn't show the Docker Compose file, but it might be that I didn't clear out leftover files in here. Didn't do it. So what I'll do now is I'm going to cheat and just go ahead and show you where I got with it 15 minutes earlier. So I'll just do a hard. Oh, right. So the other thing I was going to show y'all is Warp. So Warp is a command line that has AI built into it. So if you get tired of Googling for how to do different Git commands, I can say, I can just come over here and just type natural language, it'll detect it. I can say, remove all the unstaged, or I'm sorry, untracked files in my repository. You might have that command memorized. Oh, I hit my request limit. Okay. Anybody know that command in Git? Will stash do untracked though? It's like git clean FD, I think. All right. Yeah. Okay, cool. Actually remembered something. So what I'll do is I'll just go to this other branch that I had. So in about 15 minutes of iterating on that, let me close all these other ones. So in about 15 minutes of iterating on that, it came in and it created this Docker Compose file for me. The Docker Compose is going to have 3 services. One is the Postgres, which is going to have the dummy data mapped into a volume. You've got your Next.js as another service. These will each be containers running on a Docker network. And then the test setup here, which will be the next the node piece. And it created the Docker test file, etc. And then to run it, you just come in and say Docker. Wait a minute, what is the command? There it is. Docker Compose -f Docker Compose test YAML up build. It'll tell you that too when it does it. So what happened here too is it created the flow for me, and I ran it. The test failed, and then it's like, wait a minute, I need to change something. This is annoying. So then I said, can you please make it so it'll watch? And then it had added a watch to it. So when this gets done, you'll see that it will actually watch the file system. You can make the changes and it reruns the test. And then a tests are actually going to fail. And that gives us an opportunity for me just to show you real quickly how once you get something set up, we can kind of fix it real quick. not liking that I have ports being used on these. Fill those real quick. And if you haven't used this this testing approach, I definitely do recommend it. You'll be surprised at how valuable it can be to have just some easy integration tests over your API. All right, here we go. Okay, so tests are running, and one of the tests is failing here. So now we're looking and say, okay, how do we fix this test, right? So what we can do, copy this and Shift-I, reset this, find our text file at files, going to be what is test? The Docker test probably. Carriers test. Here we go. Yeah. So here's our test file. So then we can just say Command Shift I. It's already got the test file in there. You just tell it fix, paste in the terminal content there. So now it's going to come through. Looks like we're missing a library. It told me I'm missing a library. I can grab that there, accept all. Then over here, all the needed library. We run our test with the white space change. Okay, and then that's basically the general idea is you would keep iterating on that until you get a test that's passing. And earlier today when I did this, I was able to get these 3 tests, one of which basically gets a list of carriers back, one that does the post, and one that does the put working in about 15 minutes. That's the overall flow. What I'm trying to go for here, like I said, is a dev flow where our developers can move really quickly on this stuff. And my idea is that we will get the feature done, lay down some tests. Once the tests are passing, do this classic agile thing, go in, clean up the code a little bit if you need to, and then move on to the next piece. And it should take you probably like maybe twice as long to do that than if you just wrote the feature. But I feel like if you were disciplined about doing that, you probably would find that you wouldn't get stuck. And when it comes time to do some bigger refactorings and stuff like that, you'd be in the right position you need to be. And that's pretty much all I have to present on this. Any questions about any of those tools or the techniques? Oh, wait, hold on.
Hello. All right. I just downloaded Cursor 2 days ago and it's been amazing. And I just started experimenting with Composer. Do you do any multi-file editing with the sidebar chat interface, or do you typically just use the Composer for that?
I've been using pretty much almost exclusively the Composer. I find I'll use the sidebar sometimes if I want to ask about some command line stuff and I don't feel like jumping over to Warp. But for the most part, I find I just stay in Composer. The most annoying thing about it is that the windowing's kind of weird with it. As I'm sure you probably noticed, it's just there and you can't do anything. But yeah, I mostly just use Composer, and then I'll just reset it every time I have something.
So you don't use Command K very much, just like
Not really, no.
Okay.
I've just been using mostly Composer. So I'll just open up Composer, tell it to do some stuff. And then usually like, if you get to the point where you're getting errors, you're just dumping the errors in and telling it to go, go, go. The other thing, if you do this, commit often, right? Every time I get something working that's even slightly promising, you commit, because it's really easy to get about 5 prompts out and end up with like, it's just quicker to start over, right? Like, because you get to where something's not building and whatever, you know?
Last question. Do you add your own API key for Anthropic, or do you just use the default?
I think I just used the default because I paid for it, and like it's never ran out on me. And that's the other thing, that in Cursor, I've never had it tell me I hit the limit, which is every other tool I've used, you end up like, it'll tell you like, oh, you've got 12 requests left until 4 o'clock, and it's like 11, and you're like, what, am I supposed to take a 3-hour lunch today or something, you know? So any other questions? Sure.
Hey, so for your sites, do you, I guess, is your plan to sort of standardize the prompts for your team? So I know you're typing in like off the cuff for, I guess, different areas for this site, but I guess, would you have sort of like a standardized prompt template that they would put in, I guess, based on the feature that they're creating?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Probably more like heuristics, kind of like what Ted was sharing, but I feel like it's most interesting when you're kind of doing the architecture parts of it, you know what I mean? So for example, when I first tried doing this and I didn't know to specify Tailwind and Shed CN and all that, I didn't get great results. So it would probably be more similar to kind of having recipes. Like for example, I mentioned I really like this Docker Compose flow with testing with Jest, and so that would be kind of something I would tell the dev team, just set it up like that, you know, and they could come up with their own prompts for that or whatever. Make sure you set up Cypress. So it'd probably be more kind of those broad stroke kind of things. And then guidance around, make sure when you get done with a section, you add the test and stuff like that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Cool. Who else? Anybody trying Cursor yet? I knew the one gentleman was who walked out. I think that's in it. Yeah. No, I definitely, if you're gonna do AI coding, I definitely recommend trying Cursor and try out the command prompt, the command shift I guy, the composer. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, y'all. I hope that was helpful for y'all.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Ted. For those of you who joined online, thanks for joining. We appreciate it. And if you're here in person, part of the beauty of meeting in real life is to actually connect with folks. So please come say hi to me if you don't know me. Ted also, by the way, is a co-organizer of this meetup. So, you know, we have the room for a little while, so feel free to hang out and chat. Thanks for coming out. Hope to see you next time.